Hey everyone, DMV SoloRider back with another video. As you can see, we are back in the absolutely beautiful DC National Harbor, which coincidentally is located in Maryland, of course. Go figure. But today we are going to do our 10,000 mile review of my 2020 Indian Challenger Limited. So no, your eyes are not deceiving you. Different t-shirt, different surroundings. We're right now standing in my favorite rest stop in Nanjemoy, Maryland, down by the Potomac River. So just to be clear, when I did my 6,000 mile review of my Chieftain and I did my intro video to the Challenger, it was beautiful weather out. It was June for the Chieftain and I think the end of September for the Challenger, beginning of October. So you're riding every day. It's no big deal to take a day to film a video. And these videos take, hours to film to get everything the way you want it, etc. I started doing my Challenger review in February, which was our worst month of the winter. We had a lot of snow, ice, just bad weather. And so whenever it would be nice enough to get on the bike, I'd go and try and film my review. But, a quarter way through, half of the way through, I couldn't stand just standing here gabbing about the bike. I wanted to be out riding it. So I think the first 2 times I tried, I quit and went for a ride. The third time, I tried to do the review while I was riding. It worked okay for some parts of it, particularly if you're talking about the engine. And then the other day at the National Harbor, I actually refilmed everything. So I think what I'm going to do for this video is kind of splice it all together. So in some scenes, I may have a different shirt. We may have different scenery, whatever. I'm doing my best under trying circumstances because it's really hard for me to just stand next to the Challenger when I could be out riding it. So whether you've been watching the channel for a while or you're new to my channel, one thing you know about me is I'm not a wrencher. I'm not mechanically inclined. I'm not going to put up a dyno chart and talk about torque and horsepower in like an engineering way. So for today's review, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put up different elements of the motorcycle specs from Indian's website. And then I'm just going to talk to you a bit about my experience on the Challenger to fit those slides. The best I can do based on my experience and based on the motorcycles I've owned to date is just talk to you about how the motorcycle feels in terms of power and performance, handling, suspension. And I would say in order for you to kind of appreciate where I'm coming from when I'm talking about the Challenger, it helps to have a little bit of background about the motorcycles I've owned to date, because I'll probably do quite a bit of comparing and contrasting. I'm going to put timestamps in the description section below. That way you can fast forward to those parts of the video you want to watch. I would certainly appreciate if you give this video a thumbs up. I put my ride and ride related content out every Friday. If you hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, you'll get an alert when my new content is out. And it really helps the channel out. It helps my videos find their way to people looking for motorcycle content, so I'd certainly appreciate it. Figured, if we're going to talk about the Power Plus and its performance and characteristics, better to do it while we're actually riding it. And what I would say about the Power Plus is, it's a fantastic engine. I have not ever come across a review, either in written form or in video, where anyone criticizes the engine. It just gets rave reviews. Hopefully, in watching my videos, you get the clear sense that I love riding the Challenger and I love the engine's performance. Hopefully that comes through clear as day, because it's true. And, talking to you about my thoughts on the Power Plus, I have to compare and contrast with my Chieftain and the Thunderstoke 111. Because I think they're really comparable, at least lower down in the rev range they both have that same oomph from all the torque that they have. You know, the Thunderstroke has 119 foot-pounds of torque. The Challenger has 128 foot-pounds of torque. You know, people write that, you know, oh, it's measured at the crank, not at the rear wheel, and the rear wheel it is a more reliable measurement. The numbers are going to be a little lower. Okay, I mean, I don't think it really matters. I love what I'm feeling. And, you know, lower down in the revs, lower gears, like in second gear at, say, 50 miles an hour, you jam on the throttle, they feel very comparable. And that's not a criticism of the Power Plus. I think it's probably a real compliment to the Thunderstroke that it feels so great. And I love them both. And for the kind of riding that I do, you know, while I've had the Challenger on lots of long road trips with plenty of highway miles, you know, the majority of my riding is like out in country roads where you're going 40, 50, 60 miles an hour. You're downshifting into maybe a 25 or 30 mile an hour curve and then jamming on the throttle coming out of the curve. I'm not typically flying down the highway at 80 miles an hour outside of those road trips. You know, maybe getting to and from a ride, sure. But most of my riding is that, you know, 40 miles an hour to 60 miles an hour, third gear, fourth gear, second gear. And the Thunderstroke and the Power Plus are really comparable under those kind of riding conditions. And just as an aside, you know, I have ridden the factory 116 on a 2020 Chieftain Limited. That test ride is on my channel. Feel free to go check it out. And I'll be honest with you, for the kind of riding you do on a typical demo ride, I didn't really notice a difference. Now, you know, the 116 has more horsepower, more torque. It may be the case that if I took a 116 out in the countryside, I would notice a big difference. But I didn't on the one ride that I took. So all my thoughts are about the 111, which I think is appropriate. Having said all of that, where I find the Power Plus really separating itself from the Thunderstroke is, you know, at higher speeds, higher in the rev range. You know, on the Thunderstroke, the Chieftain Thunderstroke 111, when you're flying down the highway, say at 80 miles an hour in sixth gear, and you want to pass a truck, you don't need to downshift to pass. But, you know, there's not a lot of power there. The bike will accelerate, but, you know, kind of slowly. On the Challenger, in that same circumstance, when you jam on that throttle in sixth gear, I mean, you're at 100 miles an hour before you even know what happened. It's a big difference higher up in the rev range. You know, depending on the gear and the speed, etc., it just feels a lot more powerful higher up in the rev range than the Thunderstroke. And from my experience, that's the biggest difference between the two. Now, talking about power and performance, I want to take a minute to talk about liquid cooling, because the Challenger is liquid cooled. The Thunderstroke 111 is air cooled. My Scout was liquid cooled. And of the three motorcycles, I would say the Scout was by far the hottest of the three as a liquid cooled motorcycle. Now on the Scout, the exhaust is a little higher up on the bike. It was running on the inside of my thigh. You felt that heat all the time. On the Chieftain, where, you know, the exhaust is lower down, it's more by your foot and your ankle than, you know, the inside of your leg. And you could feel the heat, you know, on a hot day, pulling up to a light, you'd feel heat wafting. The Chieftain had rear cylinder deactivation, which was helpful. And on the Challenger, you feel heat as well. If you pull up to a light on a hot day, you're going to feel that heat wafting around your legs. It's not something that discourages me from riding in any way. The Challenger has rear cylinder deactivation, and when it's running, it does help reduce that heat. But in terms of the two motorcycles, I couldn't tell you that liquid cooling on the Challenger does anything to really reduce the kind of heat we're talking about compared to the Chieftain, which is air cooled. My understanding of the benefits of water cooling is for greater horsepower. It isn't really that the engine doesn't get hot. I've gotten a lot of questions from folks asking if the liquid cooling makes a big difference, and it really doesn't. I don't think it's supposed to be honest with you. But that's my experience with the Challenger. I'm fine with it. The heat that the engine puts off isn't any big deal, but I didn't have an issue with the heat on the Chieftain either. One thing about the bike's rear cylinder deactivation, I mentioned this in my intro video. You can hear this. It's like a thunk, 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 and you can feel it in the handlebars. That's something I've been experiencing on the Challenger since I started riding it. I brought it to my dealer's attention, and they did their research, and apparently there's a little bit of gas that makes it into the cylinder once the rear cylinder deactivation turns on, and that's causing that kind of knocking sound and vibration. Their view is that it's a future software update will fix the issue, but nothing's been issued so far. But aside from that kind of annoying sound and feeling, it works fine. It does reduce the heat. So let's talk about the Challenger's transmission. The Challenger has a 6-speed transmission. It's got a slipper clutch. As I understand the purpose of the slipper clutch, if you're downshifting and you skip a couple gears, you let the clutch out. If you would otherwise have too much power at the rear wheel, you could spin out. And the slipper clutch basically neuters that power until the transmission and the wheel are in sync, something like that. Prevents you from spinning the rear tire. I honestly can't say I've experienced that. When I'm shifting the motorcycle, I kind of go up in the gears and down in the gears. I don't skip gears. But, it's nice to know that it's there. Can't say that I've really experienced anything about it that would let me know it's doing something. When I'm shifting the motorcycle, it clicks into gear just fine. It's a nice loud thunk. It can be a little finicky in neutral. I find that upshifting from first to neutral, I miss it probably 9 out of 10 times, end up in second gear. You just tap the lever, you're in neutral. Can't really say why that is. It's not something that really bothers me that much. What I would say about the transmission is really about the clutch. When I got the Challenger, it was brand new. Nobody had ever ridden it. And the clutch lever was at full extension. There was no free play in the clutch. And when I was just starting to ride the bike, I hit a lot of stop and go traffic the first few days. And for my smaller hands, it was a real bear to negotiate the friction zone where the clutch lever was basically at my fingertips. And with the slipper clutch, I find that the friction zone engages when the clutch is just about fully released. So in stop and go traffic, you're managing the friction zone with just the tips of your fingers. It's a little uncomfortable. So I went and I did some research, and the owner's manual is pretty clear that the clutch should have some free play. When I got the bike, it had none. And the owner's manual recommends like 0.5 millimeter to 1.5 millimeters of free play. You measure it right here at the clutch perch, and just a little tape measure, whatever, measure it. You make the adjustment down below. And once I did that, I added 1.5 millimeters of free play, and problem solved. That's not a complaint about the clutch. It's just something if you get a Challenger, if you have smaller hands, it's something to be cognizant of. If you find riding the bike, it's kind of a bear, check the free play, make your adjustment, you'll be fine. So we're going to spend some time talking about ride command, and that's, what you use to change the rider modes on the bike. I figured this is a more appropriate place to talk about the different rider modes. So the Challenger has rain mode, standard mode, and sport mode. And the difference is basically, depending on the mode you have it in, it can neuter the throttle. So rain mode, the throttle is really neutered. If you jam on the throttle in rain mode, you're not going to, fly down the road. And that's to make sure that you don't have unanticipated issues due to power on slippery surfaces, etc. Standard mode is kind of in between rain mode and sport mode. It's supposed to be a nice predictable throttle, good for all modes of riding. And then sport mode is your zippiest throttle response. In my experience, I prefer sport mode over the other two on the Challenger, which is an interesting contrast with the Chieftain, which also has rider modes. They had touring, standard, and sport. I think those are the three. And I actually preferred touring mode on the Chieftain. It was not rain mode. It was, the first of the three, but it wasn't a rain mode. It was like a all-purpose mode for all kinds of riding. And I had actually done some research and found that there was more torque lower down in the RPMs in touring mode on the Chieftain than the other two modes. But on the Chieftain, I found that sport mode on that motorcycle was never as reliable and steady and consistent as it was in touring mode. The Challenger is just the opposite. I find sport mode to be precise, excellent. You always know the power you're getting based on how you're turning the throttle. The only issue I've had with the rider modes isn't really the modes themselves, it's with the throttle. When I first got the Challenger, I had a heck of a time with the throttle. I first got the motorcycle, I was breaking it in. You're not supposed to really lay on the throttle for the first, I think, 400 miles, something like that. And so, my idea was I'll put it in standard mode, I'll break it in, and then I'll play around with sport mode. And I was having so much trouble with the throttle when the motorcycle was brand new, especially in stop-and-go traffic. I was, lurching forward. I was jerky. No matter what I did, I couldn't get the precise inputs on the throttle that I needed. I actually found sport mode was the best of the three in that break-in period. And when I discussed it with my dealer at Chesapeake Cycles, they told me that the onboard computer learns your throttle inputs over time, and that jerkiness, that lack of consistency, should smooth out and go away. And I'm happy to say, I think as I've mentioned in past videos, that absolutely is true. The throttle on this motorcycle after the break-in period has been excellent. The consistency in the response you get based on how you're twisting the throttle it's the same all the time. I happen to prefer it in sport mode compared to standard, and I never put it in rain mode. But if you're thinking about getting a Challenger and you get one like I did, right out of the box, nobody's ridden it, the throttle might take a little time to kind of work out the kinks, but stay with it. It's only temporary. So that's what I really have to say about the rider modes combined with the throttle. All three work as expected. Very satisfied with them. And sport mode is king. So one additional thought about the Challenger's throttle. Some people have complained that the throttle has some play in it. And it's true. It has, I would say, about 1 millimeter's worth of play. That is a really small amount. And once you start riding the motorcycle, you get used to it almost immediately. And it is in no way, shape, or form a barrier to getting max power out of the throttle. It doesn't reduce your riding enjoyment in the least bit. In my experience, if you're reading a review or watching a video and someone is going on and on about the throttle on the Challenger and how, I just don't like the throttle, usually that's someone looking for something to complain about. All I can tell you is go ride a Challenger. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about. So before we talk about how the motorcycle actually handles, I want to talk about what to me is one of the most important things that I have to offer to anyone looking at a motorcycle. So I am 5'6", 5'7", I have a 28-inch inseam. I'm short. And the motorcycle's big. And a lot of people I've come to discover, and really I had the same experience before I ever test rode a bagger. You know, a huge motorcycle like this weighs over 800 pounds wet. I really probably have no way to actually ride this bike. But because my neck issues made me consider alternatives, I went and I test rode one, and it has not been an issue at all. So I want to get on the motorcycle. You know, while I'm sitting here, one thing I do want to commend Indian for, the kickstand on the Challenger has a spring. You kick it a little bit, it flies right out. It's excellent. The kickstand on the Chieftain was so far away that I couldn't reach it. I had to get the short person extension kickstand that has like a little tongue that comes off of it that you grab with the toe of your boot and pull it back. The Challenger doesn't have those issues. But anyways, it's 26.5-inch seat height. As you can see from my feet, the balls of my feet are on the ground, firmly on the ground. The only time they're not firmly on the ground is if the road is uneven, and there are plenty of times you come to a stop on a road and it's tilted. You know, there are some roads I ride where I'm basically, you know, I got one foot down, my leg is perfectly extended, I'm on my tiptoes, and that happens. You know, I'm short. What I can tell you is this motorcycle, I mean, you see how easy you get it up. It's so simple. There's no top-end weight up here. The motorcycle doesn't feel tippy. Like, just sitting on it, as I've done in past videos, I'm like barely making any effort to keep the motorcycle up. It's so easy. And when I test rode the Road Glide, and I was trying, you know, riding it in stop-and-go traffic, I felt the weight on the inside of my legs. It felt heavy. And the seat was a little higher, the stock seat was a little higher, so I was a little less on the balls of my feet and more on the tiptoes. And it's more to keep in mind as you're riding a big bike. But, you know, anyone my height, you will never have trouble riding this motorcycle. I would say if you are a comfortable person being short, you know, 5'4", 5'3", 5'2" even, I don't know, it depends on you. But as long as you're comfortable having 1 foot down and 1 foot on the brake and shifting your weight on the motorcycle, you know, I don't care who you are. The idea that if you're riding your motorcycle all day long, you're not going to come to a red light and just want to put it in neutral so you can give your clutch hand a break, of course you're going to want to. And so, you know, when it comes to that kind of a situation, if you're shorter, if you can't get both feet on the ground at the same time, that's not a problem. But you got to be able to shift, you know. I'm on the clutch, I'm on the brake, clutch, brake. You got to be comfortable doing that. And this bike is eminently reasonable in that regard. If I stand up in the seat, you can see I can get my foot flat on the ground. And really, you know, what I can convey to you about, you know, riding a bagger as a shorter person is you just have to be careful. You have to be, you know, be aware of your surroundings. When you're pulling up to a light, you know, assess the road conditions. A lot of roads, older roads especially, have divots from trucks. You want to make sure you're not putting your foot down in a divot. And, you know, one of the benefits of riding a motorcycle, as we know, is you want to be on the side of the lane, not in the middle of the lane, because you want to avoid oil that may have dropped down from a car. So your wheels should be in that divot, and you'll be on the higher part of the road, ideally. But, you know, you just got to pay attention to your surroundings. It's not uncommon where you go to put your foot down, and there might be gravel, and your foot could slide a bit. So you got to be prepared for all of those things. I had my experience riding the Challenger is no different than the Chieftain. I found both motorcycles to be eminently manageable. The weight of them, the size of them, is no reason not to ride them for a shorter person. And one thing I do want to point out while we're sitting here, I want you to see my riding position. You know, this is basically how I'm riding the motorcycle. If you look at my legs, I'm sitting in a chair. The floorboards on the Challenger, same thing with the Chieftain, are so long that my riding position is more like mid controls than forward controls. It makes for a really comfortable ride for me. I know, you know, other guys who are really tall, sometimes they talk about getting cramped on a motorcycle. I'm never going to have that experience, I don't think. The only issue I've had with height is for the highway pegs. you have to kind of turn them in a bit. So it's not perfectly flush with your foot. You got to kind of turn in a bit to actually use them, which is not really a big deal. But if I put them at a 90-degree angle from the bike, I wouldn't be able to reach them. That's the only issue I've had with height on this motorcycle. One other thing I do want to touch on as we're talking about my, physicality of riding the motorcycle is I want to talk about, the fairing weight at the front end of the bike and the handlebars. So on the Chieftain, at low speeds, if you went to go to a stop and your bars were turned a little bit, you're going to feel that weight. You have the whole fairing resting on the front forks. On the Challenger, because the fairing is attached to the frame, it's much, much lighter. I mean, noticeably lighter. When I'm doing low speed maneuvers and I have, my bars at full lock, I have not had an experience where I felt weight at the front end from the fairing. That's my personal opinion. The first time I ever rode a Challenger, when I was duck walking the bike around a parking lot, I was a little wobbly. I think that was just me being a little wobbly. I don't think it really had anything to do with the fairing. So yeah, I'm an advocate for shorter riders, at least test riding baggers and giving it a shot. I don't recommend that you go out and you do one little test ride and buy one. I would recommend you go and rent one. Rent Harley, Indian Rents baggers at some of their dealerships. Rent one and keep it for a weekend. Go ride for a few hundred miles. See if you really like it. I didn't do those things when I bought my motorcycles. The Scout, that was the bike that made me get a license. I was buying it come hell or high water for the most part, with the exception of my Triumph story, which I've addressed in other videos. When it came to the Chieftain, it's an outstanding bike. I was lucky that, my little test ride, and when I did a test ride, it was like, 10 minutes. I'm lucky that it was a great bike. The Challenger, I gave a much better test ride, but it's still just a test ride. I mean, you really got to go hundreds of miles to get a sense of, do I like this bike? Am I comfortable with this bike? And that's what I would recommend you do. I mean, really, for any height. But if you're shorter and you've never ridden a big bagger, go rent a bike for a weekend and see how you like it. Live with the bike for a few days. But you'll never catch me telling you, no matter how short you are, that you can't ride a bike like this. Oh, one other thing we should talk about. As I did with my Scout and as I did with the Chieftain, I put Indian's reduced reach handlebars on the bike. So my seating position, is 2 inches farther back than stock. In the first video I shot on the Challenger, you can see me in my front camera. I'm like leaning forward quite a bit. Now I'm much more relaxed. This is the reach that I have. I've shot this before in my intro to the Challenger video. It's not as comfortable as the Chieftain. For me to be firmly on the grips, I have to be leaning forward a little bit. Sorry for the audio overlay, but I needed to share some further thoughts on short riders and baggers. By the way, I'm using video that I took from my Challenger introduction video. It's a little more dead on from the new video I shot for this review, but I think it's actually more helpful. It gives you a better perspective of my reach on the bike, so we'll use it for this. Anyway, I feel like my thoughts on short riders riding baggers came across perhaps too cavalierly. Don't get me wrong. I do not believe short height is a barrier to riding a bagger. I know that from experience. But the shorter you are, the more consideration you really need to give to the things that go into riding a motorcycle where a bagger is concerned. For example, I've heard from some 5'3" riders over the past year asking for my thoughts about whether they can manage a Challenger or a Chieftain. I think so, but it's ultimately all about the specific rider. Can someone at 5'3" reach the shift and brake pegs, which are forward on those bikes? These things can be modified, but it's something you'll want to contemplate. Similarly, will you be comfortable with your arms and hands spread wide to get a bagger's bars at full lock to make a tight U-turn? Only you can decide that for yourself. Most importantly, you need to ask yourself, how strong are your low-speed maneuvering skills? Once a bike is underway, they're easy to ride. It's the low-speed stuff that will get you into trouble. Can you inch along and stop and go traffic at a couple miles an hour with your feet never leaving the floorboards? If so, great. But if you're short and you struggle with that on a smaller bike, you're going to struggle with that on a bagger, but now you're struggling with over 800 pounds. So I think it's important you be honest with yourself, because ultimately you're probably going to drop your bike even if you're the best short rider ever. I think I'm a good rider. I practice. I pay attention just like I advise in my videos. I've dropped all 3 of my bikes in the Challenger twice. Each time it was either at a stop or just coming to a stop, and it was a question of not recognizing uneven pavement or my handlebars being crooked at an awkward stop, and before you know it, the bike starts to lean. With the Scout, with one exception, I was always able to muscle it and keep it upright. The one time this happened on the Chieftain, and the 2 times it's happened on the Challenger, there wasn't a chance. I was lucky that I immediately knew the bike was going down no matter what I did, and I was able to just brace it enough to lay it down gently. No damage, no scratches, just a bit of embarrassment and frustration. The point is, even the most conscientious rider, I'm not saying that's me, just that I try, can mess up. So you need to appreciate and be at peace with it. And on that note, there are some great videos on YouTube demonstrating how a short person can pick up a bagger. It's really not that hard at all. Anyway, I don't want to discourage you in any way. Anyone my size can ride a bagger. I'm confident shorter people can too. How much shorter is all about you and your comfort and skill level. And my final thought on the subject is always add crash bars if they don't come with the bike. They cost a lot less than bags, gas tanks, and fairings. All right, back to the video. So let's talk about the brakes. That's the next slide up on the screen. I'm no braking expert when it comes to motorcycles in terms of the actual products. The brakes on the Challenger work great. They're Brembos. High performance sport braking is my understanding. The non-Brembos on the Chieftain were excellent too, and the brakes on the Scout also were excellent. I've never had an issue where I didn't feel like the brakes weren't doing the job. The one time I've had to do true emergency braking was on the Challenger. I was, riding down the BW Parkway, high speed, with plenty of safe following distance to the cars in front of me. And, all those cars stopped short. I went to do some emergency braking. I tripped the ABS. I was able to just check my mirror real quick, see there was no cars on the right, and I just swerved around and kept on going. When I'm in a parking lot, I do emergency braking just fine. I don't trigger the ABS unless I'm trying to do it. And that's really all I can tell you about the braking. I don't think you're going to have any complaints. So up on the screen is the slide for suspension and handling. And I want to be very clear with you. In my less than 2 years of riding, I don't know that from my experience I can really explain the difference between the Challenger's inverted front forks and the traditional forks on the Chieftain or the Scout before it. I understand the concept behind them. I really can't say I've experienced anything where I can tell you, oh yeah, I feel that difference in the front forks. It isn't that they aren't superior. It's that I never had a bad experience with the Chieftain or the Scout to compare it to. The only experience I've had where the inverted front forks may have made a big difference was when I was on my Florida road trip. I was riding down the road on the way to the Ozello Trail, and there was a huge pothole that I didn't see until I was right on it. I mean, there was no swerving to avoid it. You were going over it no matter what. And I went right over it. And, I stood up a little bit on my floorboards, and I felt it, and the bike just kept on going. There was no loss of control. Nothing untoward happened. Felt great. I was worried maybe I cracked something, maybe something broke. Not a problem. That's the only experience I've had with the suspension, at least the front end, where I really have anything to offer. The front end suspension's been great. I haven't experienced anything that matches the definition of nosediving from a bad front end suspension, but I never experienced it on the Chieftain or the Scout either. So all I can do is tell you that's my experience so far. Take it as you will. Hopefully that's helpful to you. As far as the rear suspension, amazing. I'm telling you, 10,000 miles on the Challenger, 11,000 miles on the Chieftain, 5,700 miles on the Scout. The rear suspension of your motorcycle makes all the difference in the world. On the Indian Scout, with those progressive shocks, if you ran over a cigarette butt, you're going to fly out of the seat. On the Chieftain, all of that was eliminated. It had an air shock in the back, and on the Chieftain, I never had that experience. It ate up pavement. It was not an issue. Same thing for the Challenger. I have never had an experience where I'm riding down the road and I'm flying out of the seat. It's super comfortable. Making adjustments to the preload is very simple. You just remove this panel. You take the wrench that comes with the bike's tools and you turn the little nut at the top of the suspension setting, and you just pick the number that matches your overall weight. I weigh about 165, 170. My preload is a 1 on this bike. When I'm going on one of my road trips, I have the saddlebags full. I have my duffel on the back, which, it probably weighs about 30 pounds. I put it on a 2, and I've never had any issues. I've never felt the bike bottom out. I've never felt like I'm carrying too much weight or I need to make an adjustment. It's super comfortable. I put up a post on IndianMotorcycles.net, which, by the way, is an outstanding website if you're looking for information on your motorcycle, information on Indians in general. It's a great community with people who are happy to weigh in and offer you advice, share information. And so I posted on IndianMotorcycles.net, what do you want to hear from me, given my riding experience about the Challenger, that would make for a worthwhile review? And one of the responses I got was, really about the rear suspension and how does it feel when you have hundreds of pounds on the bike. Specifically, I think the request was 300 or 400 pounds. And the reality is, I've never ridden with a passenger. In my experience level, it's not a top priority to do that. I'll get there at some point. And so with my typical loadout, when I take my road trips, I don't get near 300 pounds. I'm at maybe 250, which doesn't require me to really do much preloading on the suspension. Like I said, I set it to a 2. I think that goes up to from 180 to 250, something like that. But, I just don't have a bag that carries enough stuff for me to weigh it down and do a test of the suspension for 300 or 400 pounds. So to the gentleman who made the request, my apologies. The best I can offer you is 250, and all I can tell you is not a care in the world. Maybe that would be different at 400 pounds if I had someone on the back and some luggage. If I have that experience, I'll be sure to let you know as soon as possible. Now let's talk a bit about the Challenger's handling. I think the best thing I can explain about the Challenger's handling, and I think I said it in my introductory video, riding this motorcycle is far more like riding a really big Indian Scout than something like a Chieftain. The motorcycle leans into turns like that, not a problem. It's so flickable. This does not feel like an 850-pound motorcycle. Now, I'll be honest, I thought my Chieftain handled well too, but it definitely felt a little different than the Challenger. Now, granted, on the Chieftain, I had not only Indian's 2-inch reduced reach handlebars, but I also had a 2-inch handlebar riser. So again, my riding position was ramrod straight. And when you ride like that, you have a tendency to try and push down on the handlebars to lean into a turn. That's not what you want to be doing. You want to push forward. And so, once I made those adjustments to the Chieftain, I had some issues, some entering some turns where I didn't get it quite right because I wasn't used to making myself push forward. It wasn't natural in that seating position. Once I reacclimated, it was fine. On the Challenger with the 2-inch reduced handlebars and no handlebar riser, you're still naturally pushing forward. And it just leans, baby. It just leans so easily. The Challenger handles like a dream. It doesn't feel like a big motorcycle. Again, it feels like a large Indian Scout, not a Chieftain. It's just a true pleasure. And, I'm the kind of guy, I like downshifting into a turn. I like getting the right lean angle, the right lane placement, at least I try. And then gunning it coming out, and the bike handles beautifully. I have never been nervous. Even if I am going into a turn too fast, the bike can handle your adjustments, whether that's with braking or leaning more, whatever you need to do. The bike responds without any hesitation. There's nothing uncomfortable about it. It's just, all I can tell you is it's a true pleasure. And so I guess talking about the way the bike handles, we talked a bit about ABS, but kind of I think what a lot of people want to hear about is the bike's traction control. This has the Bosch IMU SmartLean technology, which if you're losing traction while your bike's leaned over, as I understand it, it will reduce power to the rear wheel to keep you from wiping out, or at least give you a chance. It also will do the same thing going straight. If you're spinning the wheel, it's gonna ameliorate the power to keep you from having, as Cycle Cruiser would say, a real effed up day. In my 10,000 miles, I honestly, for the most part, can't tell you if the traction control on the Challenger has really done anything in my riding. Occasionally, when I'm shifting up from 5th to 6th, you'll see traction control flicker just a bit. And only one time in the middle of a turn did I see that flicker. It was like a 30-mile-an-hour curve. It had rained earlier, so the pavement was wet, but there was no standing water. And I'm leaning into the turn. I think I was going maybe 35. I wasn't pushing it. And I saw the traction control flicker. I can't say that I felt anything. I just saw the light. And that's it. That's the only experience I have with the SmartLean technology where there was some evidence that something was going on, but it didn't feel like it. I didn't notice any reduction in power. The bike didn't start slowing down. It didn't start standing up. It felt like it always does. But my 2019 Chieftain did not have traction control, and I missed it. Those situations where I had some pretty serious fishtails. Not the one that I caught on camera. That was pretty minor. But, the big one on 95 where, had I not kept my head, I could have wiped out and had a really bad day. Knowing that I have traction control is comforting. Now, I've been asked specifically, is the SmartLean real or marketing? I don't know that I could really tell you based on the 10,000 miles I put on the motorcycle, based on what I've seen and experienced. All I can tell you is I like knowing that I have it. I saw a video by a Challenger review by, who is it? Salty from Salty and Sprinkles. And, he, I guess, was in an intersection making a turn. He hit a patch of oil and he went down. And, the SmartLean technology didn't save him from that. I don't know the specifics of him going down, exactly what happened. But all I know is I rather would have it than not. But fortunately, I can't say I really experienced it doing much of anything. That could totally be a factor of how I ride, and that's totally okay. The last element of the Challenger that I talk about is comfort. For me, one of the main reasons I got the Challenger, I traded in the Chieftain, was to eliminate buffeting. And I'm really happy to report, kind of as I've mentioned, the fixed fairing on the Challenger is 1,000 times better than the Batwing fairing on the Chieftain for me. Now, buffeting is very specific to the rider. Riders at different heights can have different experiences, different sizes, different helmets. For some people, they feel buffeting coming from down below. Other people get it from up top or around the sides. It's really a process of elimination. On my Chieftain, I received a lot of comments that I should look for lower wind deflectors that you put on the forks. And, I certainly did my experimentation where I'd be riding at high speeds down the highway and I would block the wind out from different areas. And every time I did that low down, that didn't do anything to the buffeting. And every time, I put my windshield extension on and had it up high, it eliminated the buffeting entirely. So on that motorcycle, the only true solution for me was a much taller windshield, which would have guaranteed looking through the windshield at all times. Like, this windshield right now is up as high as it goes. If I had put, a 16-inch windshield on the Chieftain, it would have been here when it's down. And so you always would have been looking through it. And for me, I just don't like that. I loved riding the Scout where you didn't have any windshield. I had one for long-distance highway riding, but that was the exception, not the rule. And so on the Challenger, my experience with buffeting has been 1,000 times better. I still occasionally will feel a little dancing on the top of my helmet, a little tapping. And really, it just depends. Sometimes, depending on where the windshield is, depending on how the wind is flowing around you, and the natural breeze can make a difference. Adjusting the windshield a little up or a little down addresses it. Sometimes it doesn't. There's always room for improvement, but it's not at the top of my list. I think after my super cold Florida road trip, my number one priority is getting those Challenger closeouts, just to provide some more wind protection in cold weather for riding, which I'll worry about next winter. And, who knows? I admittedly have not spent a lot of time experimenting on wind management on the Challenger. I want the closeouts just to protect me from the cold, and we'll see if those make a difference next winter. But as far as comfort goes, the fixed fairing windshield for me, at my height, my size, the helmets that I have, this Icon Airflight and my other Shoei GT Air 2, outstanding. And really, the other thing for comfort that I would touch on is the seat. The Challenger seat is 1,000 times more comfortable than the seat on the Chieftain. It provides a lot of lateral support, whereas the Chieftain provides support kind of front to back. It's shaped more like a horse saddle, where, it's raised in the center and slopes down a bit. And the Challenger doesn't have that. This is a pretty flat surface. It provides great support. I still recommend, if you're going to ride hundreds of miles, hours a day, don't hesitate to stop for 10 minutes just to prevent butt burn from setting in. In my experience, once butt burn sets in, you're pretty much stuck with it for the rest of the day. And stopping for, 10 minutes every hour will give you hours more riding in a day. That's my experience. You could be different. You could have your own custom seat, whatever. When it comes to stock seats, I can just tell you the Challenger seat is 1,000 times better than the Chieftain. I'm really happy with it. So this is Indian's new ride command. This comes on every 2020 bagger. This is the main screen. And on this side of the screen, there are little widgets. You press this little gear sign, and it brings up other stuff you can add to the 3 fields on the right if you choose. And you have triggers on the left handlebar to advance to the next screen. You can get information on your current ride, car temperature. You set these up however you choose. That's navigation, that's your music. That's kind of another one that has navigation and some widgets on the side. You have triggers right here that you can navigate through the screens, and there's another trigger on the other handlebar to, access menus. This right here is a toggle, so when you're going down through menus, like if you want to select different songs in a playlist, you kind of keep pressing down, and you'll get to the song you're looking for. And it works as you would expect. It works well. So, I've talked about Ride Command on the Challenger, when I first got it, and various times over my videos. Sometimes it's a little sluggish. The most notable example I can give you is frequently if I'm riding down the highway at like 80 miles an hour. If I look at the digital speedometer, it'll say I'm doing like 60. And that's true like 30 seconds ago. So that's a little off. Another thing that kind of bothers me about Ride Command, it has a tire pressure monitoring system, but the only way you can get a reading on the tires is by turning the bike on and riding. Now, it's probably really no big deal to ride for, a few hundred feet for the TPMS to turn on and tell you what the tire pressure is. But it kind of bothers me that I would actually have to move the bike. The whole point of checking your tire pressure is to do it when they're ice cold, so you get the most accurate reading, and you can add pressure as required. So it's kind of just an irritant that TPMS doesn't actually work unless the bike is moving. Just kind of defeats the purpose. Other than that, it works fine. The different widgets you get, the different rider screens you have are good. By far, the best element of Ride Command is your ability to upload a ride onto the Ride Command website into your account, and then have that ride wirelessly sync with your motorcycle. And you just go into your navigation, you pull up the ride, and off you go. I absolutely love it. I use it all the time. The only gripe I have, which isn't really a gripe, is that you can't get warnings about police, radar guns and traffic cameras on Indian's navigation system like you can on Waze. And if you watch my videos on my Chieftain, in particular a video that I shot talking just about CarPlay and the fact that Indian didn't roll it out for 2019 and earlier baggers, you know that my desire to have CarPlay and Waze in particular was, not an insignificant reason that I actually traded the Chieftain in for the Challenger. I am happy to say that CarPlay works great on the Challenger once you get it on, up and running. It can be a little wonky, to connect everything to the bike. In my experience, you pretty much have to do it in the same order every time. You turn the bike on, connect your headset to the bike because CarPlay requires you to have a microphone in order to use it. The point of CarPlay is that it's a hands-free piece of software, so they want to make sure you can talk to Siri to instruct it what to do instead of having to touch the screen. And it works fine. You turn the bike on, you connect your helmet, Bluetooth into the bike, then you plug your phone in, and everything pretty much works fine. Sometimes if you plug the phone in first and then turn on your headset, it just won't connect, and you have to kind of shut everything off and turn it back on again. Small price to pay. Just do it all the same every time, and it'll work fine. So in one of my recent videos, I mentioned how keeping my phone in this glove box was breaking the camera. I guess kind of the resonant vibration inside the glove box, either that or the phone smacking back and forth, was breaking the optical stabilization unit on the camera. And after getting the camera replaced and Apple ultimately replacing the whole phone, I decided that the best solution was to not put the phone in the glove box at all. So I got this CarLink wireless dongle. You plug it in. It fools the motorcycle's Ride Command into thinking your phone is plugged in. This in turn connects to your phone through Wi-Fi, and you have CarPlay, wireless CarPlay. The only negative is that obviously if your phone is in your pocket and not plugged into the USB built into the motorcycle, it's not getting charged. That's only something that I've really had to deal with once. I have a portable power brick. I can put in my jacket pocket right alongside the phone. It's not really a big issue. So yeah, Ride Command for the most part works as advertised. It's a little sluggish. It shouldn't be. There's nothing about an infotainment system for a car or a motorcycle that's rocket science at this point. I assume once you figure out how to protect it from the elements, all the rest of it is no different than what you would do with a car. And I just haven't had any of that sluggishness in any car that I've owned. So, hopefully Indian will come out with a software update that will address the sluggishness, which also includes kind of the screens taking a while to come up. It can take 30 seconds to a minute or even 2 minutes for the screen to come on. But aside from all that, I have what I want, which is CarPlay and Waze. Well, guys, that kind of does it for my substantive review of the Challenger. My thoughts, my experiences after 10,000 miles of riding. And it's time for the ultimate conclusion. Based on my experiences on the Challenger, 10,000 miles, the Chieftain, 11,000 miles, and the Scout, 5,700 miles, am I happy with the decisions that I've made that have led me here? And what I would say is really between the Challenger and the Chieftain, because a bagger is a whole different ballgame than something like the Scout. And apples to apples, let's be clear. The Chieftain and the Challenger are virtually the same price. And in that apples to apples comparison, if I'm walking into a showroom and I'm buying either a Chieftain or a Challenger, I'm buying the Challenger every time. For me, superior wind protection, excellent suspension, the security and safety of knowing you have traction control, even though I can't tell you I've truly experienced it doing anything. The way the bike feels in corners. When it comes to the torquiness of both bikes, they're real comparable. kind of the top end performance of the Challenger takes it for me. But in my experience, the Challenger in all those different areas is just a little better. But here's the thing. So I bought my 2019 Chieftain in February 2020. So it was the last model year. And I got it for a 30% discount. I basically paid, I think I paid $21,000 for that bike. And the Challenger at full price is almost $29,000. And so in kind of that apples to oranges comparison, a Chieftain at 30% off compared to a Challenger at full price, I'm going to be honest with you guys, well, the Challenger is a better bike overall. It's not $10,000 better than the Chieftain, or I guess in this case, $8,000 better. And so while I love the Challenger, I've enjoyed every mile on it. If you were going to force me to answer the question of did I make a mistake trading in that specific Chieftain for what I paid for it, for this Challenger for what I paid for it, I would have to say I probably made a poor decision. For all the things that the Challenger is better at than the Chieftain, it's pretty small differences. Yes, it's comforting knowing that I have traction control. But for the way I ride, in my experience, I don't see traction control necessarily doing much. So I don't know if not having traction control on the Chieftain warrants investment in a Challenger to get it. The wind protection on the Challenger is superior to the Chieftain. In that one area, there's no comparison to me. But I can always learn to look through a windshield and just deal with it. Could have put a 16-inch windshield on a Chieftain, solved my issue completely, and saved myself $8,000. And then finally, the issue of ride command. You know, I've reviewed the new ride command. I've discussed my issues with the new ride command. And that, you know, that kind of takes some of the joy of finally having CarPlay on my bagger. So yeah, at the end of the day, if I could do it over again, I'd probably still have my Chieftain. It's a lot of money to spend on a motorcycle for the things that it does better than the Chieftain. And so if you're out there and you're trying to make a decision between a Chieftain and a Challenger, if you don't have to have the current model year, go see about last model year. Indian offers incentives. They offered lots of incentives when I got my Chieftain. I'm sure they're still doing the same thing. If you are looking at these two motorcycles brand new in a showroom, it's the current model year, it's one or the other, I say go with the Challenger every single time. It's the better motorcycle. Well, that's what I got for you on my 10,000 mile review of my 2020 Indian Challenger Limited. Hopefully you found it helpful. If you enjoyed this video, I'd certainly appreciate it if you give it a thumbs up. I put my ride and ride-related content out every Friday. If you hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, you get an alert when my new video is out. And other than that, that's what I got for you today. Next week, we will be doing a video somewhere, riding some way, loud, not loud, music, no music. I'll figure it out. But until then, you stay safe out there. I'll catch you next week.